الرحیم والعصر ان الانسان لفی خسر الا الذین آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللہ پاک فرماتے ہیں زمانہ گواہ ہے تمام انسان خسارے میں ہیں سوائے ان کے جو ایمان لائے، جنہوں نے نیک اعمال کیے، جنہوں نے حق کی بات کی اور حق کی وصیت کی. جزاک اللہ خیر.
Jazakallah sir, thank you very much. We are starting today's very important session and highly obliged Vice Chancellor, Children's University of Health Sciences, and highly obliged all the professors, Arshad, Huma, Arshad, and Dr. Iqbal Banu. आपने ये टाइम निकाला क्योंकि स्मोक था, शायद हो सकता है कि हमारे इस स्मोक की वजह से आज मौसम बेहतर हो गया, डर गया, या हमारा कुछ इस तरह के इक़दामात बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट थे, क्योंकि स्पेशली हम देख रहे थे कि बच्चों के अंदर बहुत ज़्यादा इस तरह के केसेस जो हैं वो नज़र आ रहे थे और उनका क्या इफ़ेक्ट होगा. इसलिए चूँकि हमारा जो अवेयरनेस का प्रोग्राम है PMA के प्लेटफॉर्म पे हम पिछले कई सालों से इसको करते आ रहे हैं, और मैं सबसे पहले गुजारिश करूँगा प्रोफेसर हुमा अरशद साहब से. मैडम हुमा, ही इज़ द प्रोफेसर एमरिट्स, एंड वो कहते हैं प्रोफेसर कभी रिटायर नहीं होता, वर्किंग इन द चिल्ड्रन हॉस्पिटल. प्रोफेसर मैडम हुमा, यू ओवर टू यू.
Okay.
I request all other people to mute their your mics. मैडम आपने 15 से 20 मिनट डिस्कस करना है, फिर मैडम इकबाल बानो करना है, फिर सर ने करना है.
कर दो, ये क्या है?
Okay, but then what I'm saying is I want to reduce this picture. I cannot see it.
सर रिकॉर्डिंग हो रही है सर, ठीक है, इट्स ओके.
मैंने आपने स्क्रीन शेयर मेरा नहीं हूँ मैं, उसकी वो तस्वीर मेरे ऊपर आ रही है ना, उसको बंद कर, ये बंद कर दूँ यहाँ से.
डॉक्टर हुमा, आपकी स्क्रीन शेयर हो रही है, आप प्लीज
और ये आपकी स्क्रीन शेयर हो रही है मैडम.
I was trying to actually minimize the picture on top of the screen, so okay, right. Thank you.
फोटो नहीं आ रही है.
It's okay, I don't need my photo.
सर आ रही है, आपने बोलना नहीं है सर, आप क्योंकि वो रिकॉर्डिंग होती है.
अच्छा. So thank you, Professor Mulazim. Thank you for inviting us and giving us this opportunity to discuss the effect of smog. And I think because you have actually put it in different blocks, that everybody will be looking at different aspects. So Professor Iqbal Banu with the respiratory effects of smog on children, and Professor Masood is going to be talking about how can we prevent this and what kind of preventive measures can be given. So I won't be touching on those. So mainly what was assigned to me is the effect of smog on the development of children. For me, it was interesting actually also to read more about it. And it's sad that our kids have to go through this. And as UNICEF has warned that more than 11 million children under 5 are in a dire danger as they breathe the toxic air which you and I breathe. And the air pollution levels did break records in Lahore and Multan the past week. And the air pollution is clocking in at over 100 times what the air quality guidelines from WHO are. That we are even, if we even go near the guidelines, it would be amazing, but we are far above them. Now, we know that before these record-breaking levels of air pollution, which we now face, about 12% of mortality and the deaths in children under 5 have been attributed to air pollution. The impact of this year's extraordinary smog, it will take us time to assess, but we know that doubling and tripling the amount of pollution in the air will have devastating effects, particularly on children and on pregnant women. Pregnant women, because they are in the infant which isn't born yet, is in a very, very critical juncture of his life where he is very sensitive, he or she is sensitive to all these culprits which are contributing to pollution like vehicle emissions, industrial pollution, the fuels which traditionally is used in Pakistan in the rural community as well as the pure community for cooking, small industries, the brick kilns, burning of garbage, burning of agricultural waste, they're all contributing. Now, but then what is smog? This word smog comes from the word smoke and fog. And first we saw that it was in the early 1900s. And they used it to describe a sort of a mix of smoke from burning coal, because they used to burn coal in the industrial areas. Today, most of this smog, it is like a photochemical smog. It's caused by an interaction of the solar radiation with the pollutants that we have in the atmosphere. And we look at the pollutants just to make it easy for us. The layers of the atmosphere, leave the upper layers. Just look at Earth's troposphere and the stratosphere. Now, troposphere is what basically you and I are looking. We live in it. It's from 0 to 10 miles, and then there is the stratosphere where the planes are flying, and there is a protective good ozone layer above that, but then there is a dangerous ozone layer in the low zone between the troposphere and the stratosphere, if you remember the way the layers of the atmosphere are. Now, what is this dangerous ground level ozone and what creates it? So ozone, it occurs both in the upper atmosphere, which we said is a protective layer. It protects the earth from the dangerous consequences of UV light and other things. But while it's a very helpful thing in the upper atmosphere, when it forms a layer around the earth in the lower area, it is a pollutant and it has heavy negative consequences on the human health. And ground level ozone, it is the primary component that we are seeing as the type of air pollution, which is the smog. Now, we have both the primary air pollutants and the secondary air pollutants. If you look at the air pollutants, we have both the gaseous ones and the particulate matter. And particulate matter has got huge impact on health. Gas as well, but then there is a mix. You start getting the secondary air pollutants, which form as a result of reactions between the primary air pollutants, like sulfur dioxide and the volatile air organic compounds, or the nitrogen dioxide and the volatile organic compounds, which you see the gaseous ones on the right side. And ultimately, they are present in the ground level ozone, which as I said earlier, is the major thing in the smog. Now, coming to the particulate matter, if you look at it again, you see we have looked at the size. So you have these are really it's airborne particulate matter. It's not just about a single pollutant. It's like a mix of many chemical species. So it's a mix of solid and aerosolized pollution. There's small droplets of liquid along with dry solid fragments. There's a solid core. And we define the particulate matter when you read papers on it, or you read the WHO or UNICEF guidelines. They're talking about the size of the particulate matter. So the particulate matter, which has a diameter of 10 microns or less, is important because you can take it into the lungs. The smaller it is, means less than 2.5 or up to 2.5, you can really take it in deep into the lungs. And I guess Iqbal Banu will be talking about it as well. So that is major detrimental effect. And we have heavy burden of particulate matter in our air right now in the smog. So just to give you a comparison of the size, if that is the human air and that is the size of the particulate matter. Now, they're derived from different emission sources. So if you look at the combustion of gasoline and diesel fuel or wood, so they will produce much of the smaller sized particulate matter. And the larger size comes from the construction side. So you have both in the urban areas. So you have a lot of emission of these things from vehicular emissions, from these uncontrolled emissions from cars, buses, everything on the roads. And then you also have the construction sites and then burning of fuel, of waste. And so what is AQI? And now you probably are familiar with it, and we don't really need to dwell too much into it, but it's like a daily measurement of the quality of air that we breathe. and it's calculated by looking at the 5 air pollutants. If you remember, we spoke about the particulate pollution and the gaseous, which is the carbon monoxide, the sulfur dioxide, the nitrogen dioxide. So it looks at 5 air pollutants and then it rates it. So if you look at the rating, we have crossed red long time ago. 0 to 50 is considered good, but I don't think we were ever probably in the 50s, unless it was a COVID lockdown, maybe we wouldn't know. But then we are, if you look at what we are today, this was a snapshot I took yesterday of Lahore. And a lot of areas in Lahore were above 1,000 or 800 or 790. And so the purple is very unhealthy and the brownish is hazardous. So entire Lahore was purple and there were hot spots of being very hazardous. And Professor Masood, in Model Town, it was considered, this is more than 800. So I don't know why that is the case. And some parts of DHA were falling in the hazardous as well. So this is the quality of air we breathe. We're talking about children, and the children have a unique susceptibility. It's interesting that in relation to their body weight, the kids drink more water, they eat more food, and they breathe more air than adults. And the air intake of a resting infant is like twice that of an adult. And also the children's metabolic pathways in the first months after birth, they're very immature. Their ability to metabolize, detoxify, and excrete toxicants is different from that of adults. The developing system's extremely delicate, not able to repair. If you cause damage to any developing system, including their endocrine or their immune system or their brain, you cannot repair it. Majority of the times, it's a lingering problem. So exposure to environmental hazards causes a series of chronic and acute diseases. And then developing countries like us, we face a double burden in pediatric environmental health. Now, we are looking at not only the direct consequences of pollution, we are looking at the indirect consequences of pollution, and we'll come to that. And we'll come to the facts mainly, which I am talking about, as Professor Mulazim asked me to talk about effects on development of children. This was an interesting thing in 2020 when it was a landmark case because a coroner in London, he made history by ruling that air pollution was the cause of the death of this 9-year-old who died of severe asthma. And so if you look at child growth and development, there is a critical window. So from conception to the second birthday, we talk about the first 1,000 days. It's a well-known word, the first 1,000 days, in which 270 days are of the pregnancy, from the day of conception, then the year 1, then the year 2. So here the brain consumes almost 2/3 of all the nutrients and energy absorbed from food and utilizes it to grow. A child who does not receive this level of nutrition or good nutrition is at risk of stunted cognitive as well as physical development. Now, why cognitive? So we say you reap what you sow. That science shows that the life is a story for which the beginning sets the tone. So when you start the story, you set the tone of the story, and you start to, it makes it either interesting or it's a story which stimulates the mind, or it's a story which might have a bad end. So children's brains are built moment to moment, cell to cell, as they interact with their environments. And as I said, there's a critical period there's a window period in the critical brain development, right from the prenatal, the first time from the time of conception. So in this critical window period, more than 1 million neural connections are formed in the first 2 years of life, each second. And this is a pace which is never repeated again. So in the critical 1,000 days period, it is imperative that the child is provided not only good nutrition, but protected from adverse events and atmospheric pollution. And what happens if we go back to the 1,000 days, that when the mother has just conceived a baby, what happens if she's exposed to air pollution? Now, but there's been a lot of study on that, particularly about the particulate matter, which in Pakistan is a huge issue. It's a major component of ambient air pollution, and it accounts for a substantial burden of diseases and fatality worldwide. And maternal exposure in pregnancy during the rapid phase of human growth is extremely harmful. And there is a lot of studies, and I just put in some of the meta-analysis that air pollution. There was a huge, this is a meta-analysis which was done to look at whether air pollution was related to preterm birth or infant low birth, if you were exposed across pregnancy, and which parts of pregnancy were more likely to be having a detrimental effect. So these reviews showed, they demonstrated positive, often very significant association between the 2.5, the small particulate matter exposure across the entire pregnancy, and an increased risk of preterm and infant low birth weight. Now, the cause of mortality in neonates in Pakistan is due to prematurity and birth asphyxia. So you are already increasing one chance by increasing the risk of preterm birth, and then again low birth weight as well. And again, this was a very interesting study that between March 2018 and February 2020, more than 3,000 pregnant women were recruited in 4 developing countries, India, Peru, Rwanda, Guatemala, and they looked at the prenatal exposure to particulate matter, and a heavier exposure was associated with again lower birth weight. And if you look at in prenatal exposure, the respiratory effects and the effects on the immune system are there as well. And Iqbal Banu will be talking about the lung. And so prenatal exposure to particulate matter, it impacts the lung development of the fetus, and respiratory health in a variety of ways throughout childhood is affected. So you have not only increased risk of asthma, which Iqbal Banu will talk about, but there is consistent association between prenatal exposure, air pollution, and pneumonia in early childhood. But then there is also an interesting causal correlation, which I thought was a very interesting paper, which talked about the prenatal traffic-related air pollution exposure, and they looked at cord blood levels of adipokines. And so you can talk of metabolic consequences, because they showed that in female infants, there is a future risk. So you might have an IUGR baby with a future risk of metabolic consequences like obesity and diabetes. And then the very, very important part of the child's development is not just the physical, but the brain development. So is air pollution linked to brain development? And that is a question which has been asked repeatedly over the past decade. So we are seeing more and more of cognitive function issues and prevalence of neurodevelopmental disorders, developmental delay, ADHD, and then autism spectrum disorder. And there's a whole bunch of research out there which talks about examining early life exposure and the risk of autism spectrum disorder. So I picked a few studies, and there's some very interesting epidemiological studies which have investigated the impact of prenatal exposure to particulate matter on the cognitive function and similar and neurodevelopmental disorders. And not only that, they also looked at that due to prenatal particulate matter exposure, these little babies were more likely to have a thinner cortex and an impaired inhibitory control in the brain region. And this is related to other mental health issues, including addictive behavior later and ADHD. And this was a study from China, which shows they linked the exposure to ambient particulate matter with neurodevelopmental disorders. And a total of 31 studies were put to systematic review, and findings supported that among neurodevelopmental disorders, this was statistically significant to find the autism spectrum disorder in mothers who had been exposed to ambient air pollution at a significant level during their pregnancy. So we are damaging the health of these babies before they're born. And this is a picture that you and I see all the time. Let's talk about the kids who are born. Not only that before birth, you can increase the risk of premature birth, IUGR, neurodevelopmental disorders, lung disorders, immune function disorders, endocrine disorders. And here we see kids who are extremely malnourished in Pakistan, and our wards are full of them. If you look at the National Nutrition Survey, 40% of our population of children is stunted, 17.7% is wasted, and that was a very damning nutrition survey. But then look at the impact of air pollution on postnatal growth, child growth. And this is a very large study which they did from almost 3,000 Chinese counties. And this study pioneers a very empirical investigation of the link between air pollution and child growth. And since then, some other studies have come up which reveal a significant correlation between air pollution and child growth. The more the pollution, the more the growth suffers, evident in stunting, underweight, wasting, and more specifically, the effects of the spine particulate matter, again, which we talk about, is dramatic on stunting and underweight. And the interesting thing was that its impact, this of wasting, persisted up to 6 years. And so basically, if you're exposed early, the impact lasts for years. And so this is the counter study is that this was an interesting study from Australia, where the evidence indicated that if you had a good air around the schools, primary schools, greenery around primary schools, it was positively associated with, so that compared schools which had good green areas and good air around compared to schools which were more near traffic pollution. And the reading scores, the numeracy scores, and grammar and punctuation was all better in those schools which had green areas around them. So coming to the end of it, it's estimated that more than a quarter of the global burden of disease can be attributed to environmental risk factors. Okay, so my time is, I'm told, is over. So the main environmental health problems affecting children in Pakistan, they're also exacerbated by the additional poverty, the illiteracy, and malnutrition. So we face a double burden, food insecurity, malnutrition, and its related challenges, as well as environmental habits. And the increasing effect of these high levels of air pollution on prenatal and postnatal physical and mental growth has been clearly shown in studies. And the burden of respiratory diseases, which Iqbal Banu will talk about, is adding to the mortality and morbidity. And we need to take some urgent steps to address this dangerous trend, which is affecting our future generation. And I guess these steps are going to be highlighted by Professor Masood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Cheema. Very nice presentation and very good summary. And we'll ask the question after this about developmental. As you told, the first 1,000 days are very important for the development of not only the other tissues, but also the brain. We'll ask the question at the end of this. Now over to you, Professor Iqbal Banu, the Professor of Pulmonology, Head of the Department of Pulmonology and Pulmonologist Children's Hospital. Professor Iqbal Banu,